Hey there, this is Laura Whitmore with the Women's International Music Network and the She Rocks Awards. And today I am super stoked to bring you this panel about legal know-how, essential advice for musicians and industry professionals. I'm going to admit it's a topic that I am not an expert in, but luckily for us, I have three experts here to help us discuss this topic. If you guys have questions, feel free to comment. We'll have Bonnie in the background checking out the comments. We're not here to answer your specific legal questions, but if you have some topics you'd like us to explore or some general questions about things that we're talking about, please feel free to comment. I'm going to start off by asking our panel to introduce themselves, maybe talk a little bit about who they are, their background in working with, musicians and industry professionals, and then we'll go from there. So let's start off with you, Alexis.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Alexis Schreiber, one half of Schwartz and Schreiber. Brianna's my other half. She's here as well.
Hey guys.
So I am originally from San Antonio, Texas. I grew up as a singer-songwriter, guitar player, thought that was my calling initially, and then unfortunately kind of realized that my skills were better used elsewhere. So I ended up more on the music side or the business side of the music industry rather than the talent side. I went to the University of Miami School of Law and got a joint degree in law as well as music business and a master's in music business. And so from there, I went to New York and worked in-house for essentially a serial entrepreneur in all kinds of spaces, everywhere from hospitality to fashion to music and entertainment and tech, and got a lot of experience there before then honing in and kind of getting back to my music roots and teaming up with Brianna to bring it back to our passion and our basically child Schwartz and Schreiber that we're super excited about.
Awesome. It's always great to combine like your passion with your profession.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. Cool. Good to meet you. Pamela, let's go to you.
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Pamela Bebry. I am a branding and marketing attorney. I wouldn't necessarily say that I am a music attorney, but I do work with both brands and talent, musicians, actors, athletes, on what I would call their secondary projects. And so that is when somebody's being hired as a brand ambassador or launching a product line, thinking about their own personal brand separate from their kind of primary profession. So if a recording artist is looking to launch a product line. I also have a kind of a very unique niche in that I've represented a number of celebrity estates, one of which being the Elvis Presley estate. That comes from my former life. I was at a company called Authentic Brands Group for just shy of 10 years. I was one of the early legal team members, early company employees as well. They are a brand management firm that owns and manages brands, consumer products brands across all industries, home, fashion, sports, and I focused on the celebrity and entertainment team, which is where the Elvis estate work comes in. After about 10 years there, I started my own shop where I'm doing the same work, representing companies, startups, individuals, performers, musicians, with kind of any and all, brand focused projects.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Pamela. Brianna, go ahead.
Hey guys, I am the second half of Schwartz and Schreiber. Alexis kind of spoke on our backstory, so I'll tell you guys a little bit about the firm. We came together unofficially end of 2019 to kind of take our, previous experience and cultivate what we really felt was missing in, artists from an artist career perspective and on the business side, and essentially formulated an entertainment, we're a boutique entertainment firm based out of Miami, with a presence also in New York as well. And we represent, two types of clients, one on the talent side and then the other on the business side. And when I say talent, we represent everything from songwriters to artists to, vocalists, producers, DJs, actors, influencers, but with very, very, very big emphasis on the music industry specifically. And then on the business side, we represent, every type of business that you would touch as an artist. So recording studios, record labels, publishing companies, sync houses. We represented a music festival for a very long time. And so for us, it's been really valuable for us and our clients because we see both sides of the deal. And it's really important when you're negotiating and you're entering into contracts to really understand where the other side is coming from. And yeah, I kind of went off there, but you know, the essence of the firm is to really be proactive in giving advice to clients and looking at their scenarios from a 360 perspective. You know, Alexis mentioned that she comes from a business background. I also come from, you know, the corporate and IP world as applied to entertainment. So we've incorporated a lot of, you know, IP, meaning filing of trademarks, filing of copyrights, enforcement in those realms, as well as a lot of corporate work. So, you know, we help our artists structure their entities and build real infrastructure behind their businesses, as opposed to just dealing with, you know, one-off contracts as they come in. We really come in as in-house counsel. Like Alexis, she was in-house counsel prior. I acted as in-house counsel at a boutique firm for many different startups. And so we kind of took our prior experience and said, how can we put this together and really be the legal partner to the client that they really need.
Okay. Wow. That's great. It's a really good thought to think about, you know, why is this contract coming to me? What is the other side trying to, you know, get out of it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's kind of like start way zoomed out, like musician and legal advice 101. You know, and maybe we'll start from the musician's perspective. Like, what are sort of the fundamental legal considerations that artists should be aware of when they're sort of either embarking on their careers or at like or at what level in their careers should they think about some of these things? Just anybody want to jump in to start?
Sure, I can jump in.
Okay.
So we kind of say even there's no artist that's too small to consider themselves a business. So our very first advice always is to set up an infrastructure as far as like opening up an entity, have an LLC, kind of figure out what you're going to structure your business as. And that's kind of the first step is really treating your career as a business and understanding, you know, the benefits you can draw from that and where you can go so that it's separate from your individual, you know, life. And that's definitely step one. And it's never too early to start there.
I was going to say, in addition to that, and this might be a future question that you might want to ask, but I think it's important to address. A lot of artists ask us, you know, how do I know when I need an attorney? Like, I don't really have any big deals in the works, or like, I'm not going on tour for another year because I'm just in the studio right now. And the answer to that is that realistically, the moment that you're starting to create anything, that you're starting to operate your business, you really should, you know, get an attorney on board. And then that's absolutely not a sales pitch. It's something that we see firsthand, in that sometimes artists wait until, you know, they have this big deal on the table, but then the deal comes and they don't have their LLC set up. They don't have a publishing entity. They don't have their trademark filed. They have they don't own the masters of any of their music because they haven't properly papered it. So now there's rights that are being held by third parties. And so for us, we really like to take a proactive approach and like Alexa said, how can we treat your career as a business and not just you know, I'm an artist, I'm doing my art. It's like, how can we help you structure this properly?
Yeah. I'll add to that. Brianna, you mentioned it's not a sales pitch. You're absolutely right. Like, I always recommend, no matter how early somebody is, talk to a couple different lawyers, talk to a couple different law firms, because your lawyer should be a partner for you throughout your business, throughout your career. Yeah. And you want to find somebody that you work well with, that you can speak the same shorthand with, that understands you, that understands what your near and long-term goals are. And so you don't just talk to one attorney and assume that you have to work with them, right? Like, in the same way that when a company hires for somebody, they interview a number of candidates. As an artist, you should be doing the exact same thing. Find the right people, and the right people will know when it's time to step in on your behalf, versus, I tell people this all the time, you don't need me yet. right? Like when you get to this point, you need me. But today, right now, whatever it is that you're doing, you don't need a lawyer just yet. That being said, the sooner the better, because at the very least, you have somebody who can advise you and tell you, yes, absolutely, you need a lawyer before it's too late.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. Like, it never occurred to me. I guess if you're thinking about it as a business and you're a musician whose goal is to make money with your art, then setting up an LLC would protect you from liability, but also um, probably help you like from a tax standpoint and
Exactly.
many other advantages.
Yeah.
That's great advice already. I would have never thought of that. Do you think like I have a friend who actually registered her name, and then somebody a label actually launched an act with her same name, and even though she had it registered, she's been in a battle with them for a long time. So I guess I don't want to ask about her specific case. I just want to know, like, is that something people should be thinking about, like register their trademark of themselves?
Yeah, that's something we deal with very frequently, and it's come to the point where we've taken a complete proactive approach with that, to where we like when the artist is coming to us at the early phases, because we can, go ahead and run, there's something called a comprehensive search. For law firms might call it different things, where we run the name through this, super extensive database that gives us every type of mark that could be similar. And we go ahead and perform a legal analysis on that to tell the client, hey, we could go ahead and file this, but when they review the application, there might be an issue here. And so the question is, if you really want this mark and having, your trademark registered is important to you, it might make sense to, come up with a new name that we feel a little bit more confident with, because what ends up happening is, on the back end, it's very expensive to try and acquire a name. And after years, if you're an artist, you've been, you have your Spotify set up, you have your social set up, you've been touring, and then all of a sudden you have to rebrand. I mean, forget legal fees. We're now talking about marketing rebrand, PR rebrand. There's a lot of time and energy. And we've actually dealt with that with clients that have been, came to us later on in their careers. And we've had to, because of issues that arose, we had to rebrand them.
Go ahead, Alexis.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, it's also really important to remember that it takes about a year now for the USPTO to review your application to get a response. So it's really a proactive process that you should be taking, because even if you're like, oh, I'm at the point now where I need to start doing something, at that point, you're still waiting months and months and months in order to even get a response. So we definitely recommend the earlier the better.
And it's also, there's like a unique complicating factor, at least when it comes to trademarks, that just because your name is your name does not mean that your name can be considered a trademark. And so this just takes a couple steps back to, when do you get a lawyer involved? A lawyer can help you understand what you need to do or how you need to structure your business in order to build your name into a trademark, right? Because if it's not considered a trademark, or the colloquial term would be a source identifier, then you're not going, the office won't even grant you those rights, whether or not you've got the application on file. So you don't want to get an application on file, potentially late, have to wait the year for it to even be reviewed, to just be told you don't even qualify for trademark rights. So the sooner that you start to talk to somebody about what it means to be a trademark or to own one, the sooner that they can help you structure your business and structure whatever your product offering might be, or whatever your social media presence might be, in a way that actually grants you trademark rights and trademark protection.
Totally.
Yeah. I think it's probably hard for musicians, like when they're starting out, to justify like spending money on like legal advice. Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, we deal with we have, artists ranging from super, super developing. I mean, we have some artists that we represent that are in their early teens, and we work with their moms to help them set stuff up. And then we have artists who are renowned, Grammy nominated multiple times over. And so what I would say for the young maybe not young, but the developing artist, is that we understand that legal is expensive. It's not something that we expect, an artist who's putting forth all their funds into their releases and their videos and their wardrobe and all of that, to just expect them to just come out of pocket for everything. It takes a good attorney, and like Pamela said, talk to multiple attorneys to sit down and say, okay, realistically, this is where you're at. These are the 20 things that we could do for you, but we don't need to do all of that right now. Let's start with this one thing because this is most important. And also, here are some things that you can do to help protect yourself. Like, we do a lot of consulting, and consulting might be 30 minutes of our time to kind of give advice on even registering for sound exchange and ASCAP and what's the difference between the two and why is that important. So it's really about finding an attorney who is willing to be flexible and work with you. And there's also, different structures. I'm sure that you guys have, heard of this, but there's a lot of music attorneys that will take developing artists on a percentage of their gross income basis. This is a very common thing. So, you start working with the artist from the beginning, typically it's 5%. And in exchange, you provide any and all legal services that they need. And so we've worked with select artists in that capacity, ones that we really believe in and that we, feel comfortable that they have a proper team around them. So, my advice would be, and maybe you guys have something to add to this, would be look for someone who really believes in you. And if you can't find someone to, operate on that 5% structure, find someone who's willing to work with you and be flexible with, being realistic about what it is you actually need.
Yeah, I would also say it's just about sometimes investing in yourself from the beginning, because we see it a lot too, where people are hesitant to spend the money on the front end, where they're just like, it's a lot. I don't want to, make that jump right now. And so they end up just signing something or just, entering into some kind of agreement with somebody. And then when they try to get out of it on the back end, it ends up costing them threefold, fourfold, fivefold. So sometimes it's worth just kind of having that risk analysis done for you, just to be like, hey, just so you know that what you're signing, it doesn't have to be like a whole 10, 15 hour process. It could be something a lot quicker. And that's something that you can discuss with an attorney, but it can save you a lot more on the, if you do it that way, than on the back end when you're trying to get out of it.
Yeah. And Brianna, Alexis, you guys don't litigate, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So that's the other, I also don't litigate, right? So the three of us we're transactional attorneys. We do contract work. It is a big task of what we do, and a big goal of what we do is to help clients avoid litigation, right? Like, prepare the contract in a way that it has methods and systems to address defaults, to address breaches, to try to figure out how to solve those issues before they come up, right? Like, I always tell my clients, the negotiation process of a contract is a good gut check for what the relationship is going to be like with whoever we're negotiating with, right? If they're negotiating hard, it could mean that they are smart. It could mean that they are tough. It could mean that they are strict with respect to how they do things. Make sure that those things all work for you. But the point is that the three of us, the way that we work with our clients is to try to help you avoid litigation long-term costs, right? Like, I would so much rather, and it sounds logical, but personally, I would rather pay somebody for an hour of their time today than have to pay somebody for, countless hours to, like you were saying, Alexis, get me out of a situation, 2 years from now, because it turns out I didn't understand what I was signing, or I didn't know what I was giving up, or kind of what the parameters were of the contract that I was entering into.
And to Pamela's point also, we see artists frequently get in the trap of, they see dollar signs and that's all they're looking at. And so they're like, I really need this money and this and that, but they're not considering the implications of what else is in that deal. And they likely don't understand what the deal says. So if you don't, go ahead and, like Alexis said, invest in yourself up front, you may end up really, really, really screwing yourself over. And in scenarios where you're signing big deals, the other side should be, willing to carve in some sort of legal fee. And not in every scenario, but in many scenarios, when you're talking about talent versus, a bigger company, bigger organization, they should be willing to carve in something there to help the artist out, because it's important.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think when you get those contracts, like you said, you're so excited, you don't want to do something to mess up the deal. And a lot of times I think musicians probably feel like they can't push back in
Oh,
those scenarios because they don't want the deal to go away, right?
That's so true. And I think what a lot of them don't understand is that a lot of these deals are meant to be negotiated. And we see it all the time where even if you're up against the majors or somebody big, like they're expecting some pushback. And if you don't ask, you don't get. So that's one of those things where it's like, listen, we can always backtrack and say, never mind, we're fine with it. But you can't, they're not going to offer you better terms or anything like that.
Right.
So it's definitely important to not be afraid to ask, if for your own best interest.
Yeah, I mean, we've had artists signing with majors who were exactly like what you were saying, Laura. They were scared. They're like, well, if I push back on this, will the major not want to sign me anymore? And I'm like, if you push back on this and they don't want to sign you anymore, I can promise you, you're better off not signing with them. And very well, we went through a few rounds of negotiations, and it got towards the end, and the major wouldn't give on a very simple point that I said, this is a red flag. This is what my thoughts are about it. Take it and do what you want with it. And the artist, said, thank you so much. I feel like I dodged a really big bullet here, and walked away from the deal. And it was, it was a 6-figure deal. It was a big one, but it's important to understand the other implications there.
It's so important to try not to just focus on the dollars and what you could be getting. A lot of these contracts will have language that preclude you from other elements of your own business, right? And like Brianna and Alexis can speak more specifically to like what may or may not be included in the music contracts. But for me, if I'm representing a client who's being brought on as a brand ambassador for a company, there's going to be exclusivity terms in there, right? And not only are you getting paid 5-6 figures, but you're not allowed to do work with X, Y, or Z companies or within this industry or within this space. And if you get excited about signing a contract for, X number of dollars, but you're not realizing that it's precluding you from doing what could have been 4 more deals at the same time, you're really just shutting yourself off to all of those additional opportunities and the additional money.
Right.
That's very true.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I forget who said it, but one of the things that stuck in my mind was, I think because, we as the musicians or business owners or whatever it is, we don't have the same experience you guys have. We don't know what the norms of these contracts are. We don't know where, like, oh yeah, that's customary, or oh no, they're trying to get something over on you.
I know.
So that is always a tricky part of the equation. Yeah.
It's we talk, Alexis and I talk about this all the time, especially within the music industry. The norms that used to exist, even when Alexis and I first started practicing, they don't exist as much today. So it's like when a client comes to us, they're releasing a song and they're like, I produce and this person on this person's song, like, what should I ask for? And it's like, we need to know what the leverage is in this scenario. Where is the song being distributed? What's the goal with the song? Are you trying to push it to radio? Is it a club track? Like what exactly is happening here? Because standards, like they were back in the day when deals were just more streamlined, they don't exist in the same manner, which is also why it's so important to have someone like, us three or any attorney who's very versed in the space on your side to kind of advise you of like, what they're offering, it actually doesn't really make any sense based on the contribution here. So that's something that we've noticed that's been a big shift in the last few years specifically.
I think it's like anything else. Everything's more complicated.
Yeah.
But it's exciting because there's more to ask for, and there's
it's more opportunity.
More opportunity, totally.
That's right. It's more opportunity. It's not that it's complicated. It's just there's more options, right?
Exactly.
But also makes it. I mean, you don't want to kind of be blind to those opportunities or options as well. We talked a little bit about some pitfalls that you see happening with musicians. Do you have any others to add? Things that you see people making mistakes or things people should look out for?
I think that going back to the dollar sign thing, and I know that we talked about that a bit. That is just such a massive pitfall in the sense that like rights, so IP, your copyrights, ownership of your masters, the publishing percentage that you're receiving, your creative rights, your approval rights, all of those things matter so much because like Pamela said in the scenario with brand deals, where if you sign this deal and it excludes you from entering into other deals of similar nature, you're missing out on other opportunities. It's very similar in music-based deals. If you're signing an exclusive record label deal or an exclusive distribution deal, but you're giving up a significant amount of rights, I mean, those are rights that you could, procure income from in the future. So not to highlight the same thing again, but that's really, really big one.
I think one that we see a lot in the music industry specifically is there's a lot of artists that work with either peers or friends or something like that, and they rely a lot on relationships and handshake deals. And we hear it all the time. Even our artists that we work with frequently, it's like, oh, this is my friend. We're good. Like I'm just giving them this. We don't need anything formal. And that, whether it's business or music or whatever, we tend to see a lot of mistakes happen there because relationships change over time. And just because someone, you're really close with them now and you trust them, you don't know what's going to happen down the line. And so there's a lot of backtracking happening and kind of relationships get even messier when you have to paper something in the back end. So we always advise, like, even if it's your friend, you can blame it on us. It doesn't matter. Something in place so that you're not having to make a bad situation worse in the future.
Yeah, I say that all the time. It's like, just tell them your lawyer won't let you do X, Y, or Z. Like, I could be the bad cop. That's perfectly fine.
Totally fine.
The other thing I'll say is and I don't know if this is necessarily the case for the music specific contracts, but for product deals, for brand ambassadorships, for social media campaigns, an artist, one way that you could probably kind of streamline costs in the long term, find a lawyer that you like and have them build out a template contract for you that covers your services, right? So when you work with a brand to be a brand ambassador, have a template, right? Like the cost on that shouldn't be too high. Sometimes firms will do it for a flat fee. It's custom to you and how you work. And then every single time somebody wants to hire you for that purposes, you have a quick, reasonably short, not too short, reasonably short document that you can spit out to them with the specifics in, a one pager, but it has the legal protections for you. And that's a document that you, for the most part, and like, I don't want to advise you to do legal work independently of a lawyer, but for the most part, there are blanks that you can fill in and you don't have to send every version of it back to a lawyer, right? You can educate yourself. You can ask your lawyer to train you how to use that document. And then you have a document that keeps giving and giving, and you yourself are protected when you do those deals. Similar to what Alexis just said, I have so many clients that will come to me and say, I had a deal with their client and, they were supposed to pay me $2,000. I did the work, I delivered the services, but they haven't paid me. Can you help me? I'm like, sure, send me the contract. There's no contract. And it's just, you can resolve those problems, but it's far easier when you have a contract to look to. So a little bit of cost up front, get yourself a template, a document. And again, Bree, Alexis, you guys can kind of specify what part of, the music industry makes sense where you can use your own template for that. But brand ambassador deals, social media influencer contracts, easy. That's a template that you can have and work with for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we very frequently do, release documents. So like we're talking, songwriter split sheets, vocalist agreements, featured artist agreements, producer agreements. And Pamela is exactly correct. I mean, that's something we build out for, and that was one of your questions earlier, Laura, was how can we help, developing artists with legal costs? How does that make sense? Great solution. And it's something we do all the time. And I think it's important that if you are going to do that, make sure the attorney is explaining to you how to actually use the document, because, sometimes we'll see documents come through from the other side and it's very clear that it was a template because there's still comments left in there. So make sure you educate yourself on how to use it. But it's having that standard release document deck is awesome.
Yeah. I think the other thing is there are a lot of ways to educate yourself about the legal rights separate and apart from using a lawyer, right? Like a good client is an educated client. And so I don't know about you guys, but for me, when my old company acquired the Elvis estate, the first thing that my mentor did was buy me the Don Passman book, Everything You Need to Know About the Music Business. And that was my first education about the music business and, who the different players are, what the different rights are. And I mean, that book is maybe $20. You could probably get it for free with a library card. So there are incredibly cost efficient ways to educate yourself. You won't be a lawyer after reading that book, but you will have a good, solid foundation about how a lot of the people in the industry work, about how a lot of the contracts work, about some of the contracts that you're going to need. So you'll know the right kinds of questions to ask.
The difference between a master and a composition and the copyrights involved. Huge,
perfect,
amazing book.
Cool. I mean, I have so many thoughts based on all those comments you guys just said. I mean, I work for a brand, my day job, and we hire influencers all the time. And to be honest with you, if somebody came to me with like a templated contract or whatever, I'd be like, oh, good. I don't have to work on getting a contract for them. Like if this works for them, I can just have my team review it. And I don't find it off-putting at all unless there's something super weird in that template that I'm like, what? They want, this thing that I never had from anybody else before. But I think sometimes people are reticent to do that, but it actually really helps everybody to just facilitate getting the relationship going.
Yeah.
In the end, Okay. So let's say you have your contract. I want to add the other thing that I was thinking is like, if you're in the room writing with somebody, if you're with professionals, like I think everybody is expecting that it's going to be in writing. Like, okay, we're in a professional situation, but when you're hanging with your friends working on music, it is a really awkward feeling to say, hey, I think we need to sign a legal document about what we're doing here. Like, do you have any advice about that kind of scenario?
We like to tell our artists so like a lot of even, after years of being in this industry, we even have artists that they're best friends and the producer is like his cousin and, and it for us, it's like, have the team deal with it. Have your manager say, like, this is what happened in the studio. This is what I'm thinking. Can you please handle it? And that takes away, in my opinion, the awkwardness between, the two parties. And that also applies on the business level as well, because there's a lot of people who go into business together as friends. And so it's like, let the attorneys deal with it on the business level. On the artist level, managers, are a great resource. If you don't have an attorney, just some sort of third party that can help, kind of iron that out.
Your mother? No.
your accountant, and anybody who can be like a professional advisor. Mother sometimes too. Yeah.
Yeah, that does happen.
Yeah, I have a client whose father does the majority of her like business focused work. She herself is the talent. Her father is essentially her kind of business manager. And so when it comes to legal questions, when it comes to deal making, he's the one that steps in as though he is her manager.
It's true though, that helps preserve the relationship, but get get it in writing thing done without anybody getting bent out of shape.
Yeah.
That's a good thought.
Yeah. And in regards to like being in the studio too, it becomes common practice once you've been doing it. It's like, I will have, here's my lawyer's email or here's my manager's email. Like, please, like, let's discuss this after. It's a good look as an artist to come in like that, ready to go.
Right. So I think too, like a lot of us don't have a lot of experience dealing with negotiating when we're in a situation and we see those dollar signs. We're like, or somebody asks us, how much would you charge this thing on this track or whatever it is? Like, do you have any advice about effective like negotiation strategies? And does it differ at different levels in your career of how big you are as an artist or, other considerations?
Definitely. I think, as far as negotiation strategy goes, it's really important to first understand, industry standards, things that are the norm. And that was one of your points, Laura, was that how are you supposed to know if you're an artist and you're not seeing these deals constantly? And that's, again, where these professionals are valuable, because it can be like, oh, I've seen this type of deal before. This is what's common. This is what's not. This is where we can push. And that is super hard to know if you are not familiar with them. So that's kind of one thing we always say is that's an extreme value of having a team around you or people that you can lean on, is having that experience. Another thing that's really important as far as negotiation is leverage, and understanding, your leverage, who kind of holds the cards in this situation, and what can you ask for, what can you not ask for, and also your goals as an artist. So like your short and long-term goals are going to really, really play a big part in a negotiation, because you're going to need to know what to ask for based on where you want to go in the future, either short term or long term. So I think those are all things that you really have to understand as an artist before entering into a negotiation, or being able to communicate that with an attorney, or someone working on your behalf if you're using somebody else, to kind of say like, hey, this is what I want. What do you think we can ask for in this deal?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I was a consultant for a long time, and sometimes I would pretend that I was hiring people like me to see what they would want to charge me.
There you go. Yeah.
That's smart.
Because otherwise you don't know, right? You don't know what the going rate for
Yeah.
something is,
but also like
like
Pamela was saying, educating yourself. Like the Passman book has a lot of the standards there, so you can just look to that and kind of say like, hey, what's normal, and educate yourself if you don't want to find somebody else.
And they launch new editions of that book, I think probably every like 12 to 18 months or something at this point. So the standards tend to be relatively up to date. You're not reading a book from 2005 and kind of gauging against what was industry standard then. It's those are updated. I'll also say, and I feel like we should all maybe put up an affiliate link somewhere for all the books that we're talking about, but separate from the industry standard, that's also a great place where you can educate yourself. There's a ton of books about like business negotiations. My personal favorite has nothing to do about, with the music industry, the entertainment industry, is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. It's got a lot of very interesting kind of so he was an FBI hostage negotiator, right? Absolutely nothing to do with the entertainment space, but the way that he approached his negotiations is the way that a lot of people can approach a business negotiation. So while that book's not going to tell you how much you should be asking for, once you figure out how much you should be asking for, books like that can help you get it.
And there, in addition to books, these days there's phenomenal podcasts that talk about the business side of the music industry. We've actually spoke on a few of them, and they go into like pretty like detailed topics that you could almost like search in Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts, like producer agreements, and find some podcasts specifically on that type of deal. And I find those podcasts to be really educational, really valuable, because they're very like Pamela was saying, the current stuff is great.
Yeah, very current. Yeah, it's interesting. I've been listening to like a management podcast because there's nowhere else to get that really modern point of view on that topic. And I do think you're right. Sometimes the podcasts are just really talking about what's happening right now.
And you can multitask while you're listening. So that's
I don't know. I'm not good at that.
Laundry.
I might cook while I'm listening to a podcast, but I cannot work and listen to a podcast. That's for sure. Let's think about like there's so much change in the industry. There's so much change in every industry now with new technologies and emerging trends. Like, can you talk a little bit about what's happening in the industry that you see affecting, maybe from a legal standpoint? I know like the obvious topic is AI, but that may not be the only thing we have to talk about here.
Yeah, I think that something, and this is spoken about a lot on podcasts as of recent, is the saturation of the market at current with, streaming services. And I mean, AI plays into that, not to go into a whole AI spin, but like the amount of music that's being released on the daily, it makes it more difficult for artists to be seen, because artists, it's a, the world where content is king, and you have to be releasing, you have to be putting out social content, you have to really push to put yourself out there. And so there's a lot of articles and podcasts and things that talk about this in a negative way. Obviously there's some difficulty that comes along with that, but we like to really look at it on the flip side, in the sense that with the saturation and the, you know, extent of, even on the business side, the competitors from, like, we represent a few sync houses, but there's, you know, so many of them just even located in Miami, comes opportunities and options. And so what that does when you are negotiating a deal, because of, you know, the extent of independent labels that are out there, distributors, digital distributors, like the more that the artists span grows, the businesses continue to grow because the demand is there. And so what it does is it gives you leverage. Whereas back in the day, there might have been, I'm just throwing a random number out there, but like only 10 labels that you could see yourself signing to. Now, I mean, if the label's not giving you the terms that you want and that makes sense for you, then there's other options. And that's a really beautiful thing as an artist, to have that, and to have that opportunity to say, you know what, I'm going to distribute my music online for a bit, because I'm not really happy with any of these deals that people are offering me, and that exists. So I think to look at that with, like, you know, two sides of the coin is really important, but also understanding that is the current case.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that too, I think for artists, it's interesting now because you have an opportunity that there maybe wasn't before, in the sense that you have more options to build up your own career, whether it be through like social media or, you know, your own distributions, things like that. So if you're not getting the deals that you want right now, you have the option to kind of self-promote, self-market, and you do these things to build it up. Because if you can increase your following, if you can do things organically, then all of a sudden you can attract better deals or have more leverage, like Brie was saying. And I think that's an interesting thing that maybe didn't exist before, because you needed that label backing or whoever's money to promote you and push you forward. Whereas now you can kind of, if you're creative enough, or if you, I don't know, have the resources, you can really find ways to do it yourself, you know, before getting into that relationship.
I think that that's also something that's very like unique and special to the music industry. It's not something that we really see with my other clients, you know, with athletes, with actors, with like with authors. It maybe authors is somewhat similar, but it's not every industry is one in which you can kind of self-produce, self-promote, and kind of build yourself and your following and automatically build leverage, right? Like an athlete can't just, you know, a basketball player can't just go to a basketball court, shoot around, and all of a sudden, you know, as a result, become a professional.
Pay him money.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
They can get brand deals, but they can't build their basketball career independently the way that artists can. So it's something that's just uniquely special about being a musician, the way that the industry is structured right now.
Totally.
Yeah, interesting. I want to explore a little bit more about brand ambassadors. Like, is there opportunity that you see for maybe musicians that are not like, you know, huge names, but maybe, you know, middling or, you know, micro influencer level?
Absolutely. So I have and this actually spans all of my kind of talent clients, not just musicians, but there's opportunity no matter the size of your following. And there's actually been a big push lately to find what we might call a micro influencer, somebody who has, you know, only 10,000 followers instead of 100,000 or a million, if they have better engagement with their follower base, right? If I mean, 50% would be a wild number, but if 50% of your followers are engaging on a direct level, if you're communicating with them, they're sending questions and comments, you're responding, that's going to be an audience that's more likely to purchase than if you have 1 million followers, but only, you know, a couple of them comment every once in a while, because the followers are more passive. And so no matter your following, there are clients for you. You don't have to be, you know, the biggest names, you don't have to be the Grammy nominated or Grammy winning artists in order to build a brand ambassador business. You no matter what, you have a following, you have a product to sell. It's a matter of finding the synergies between yourself and the brands who are trying to contact the demographics of your follower base.
Yeah. I don't want to go too deep into that since this is a legal panel, but I would love to explore that a little bit more another time. My company hires a lot of influencers, and I think you're right. I think there's a lot of opportunity for artists out there. It's mostly, can you just do what you say you're going to do, which sometimes musicians or just people in general, just maybe they think that this is going to work for them, and it's harder than it looks, or there's other things that pull them away, like being a musician. So okay, so let's talk about like what do you do? I have this topic, handling disputes. So what happens when you're doing something in good faith and for whatever reason, like a dispute arises? Like, what kind of advice can you do to help people like resolve a dispute effectively? Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so this is where the proactive action up front really comes into play, because what a contract does, it articulates what will happen in the event of a dispute. So, for example, if you're talking about, I'm just going to go back to the record label deal again because it's top of mind, but if you're disagreeing on the way that an album will be rolled out, what does the contract say? Who has final approval rights? You go back to the contract and it should dictate that. That kind of falls into really everything, that if you have a good attorney looking at something, they'll think about every little scenario. And if not that scenario, then who dictates, who has the final call, who has final say? So that's where, again, to emphasize the importance of having some sort of written agreement really helps avoid disputes. Because if you don't have a contract and a dispute does arise, that's when, at that point, if you don't want to get an attorney involved, we would typically advise you attempt to settle with the other party. You attempt to talk things through and come to a middle ground. But a lot of times it's very difficult if there's a dispute and there's no meeting of the minds and people are, just can't agree and can't see eye to eye. Then at that point, you have to bring the attorney in and things get, way more complicated, way more sticky. At that point, it really ends up going into some sort of like settlement negotiations. And we're dealing with this with an artist right now who didn't want to spend the money up front to hire us to sign a really important deal where she was acquiring money in exchange for equity. And now it's a year and a half later and she's in a dispute with the investor, and the contract that was signed, wasn't reviewed properly. So it's very difficult to, pull back from that, as opposed to kind of being proactive on the front end.
Yeah. See, don't sign an agreement without an attorney, Ruby.
We would also recommend, sometimes if people do get in, because sometimes there are situations where it's just a dispute and it's tough to resolve when it's kind of like one side against the other. There's, multiple sides to every story and it's maybe not clear. So in that scenario, if, the agreement doesn't necessarily specify what kind of dispute resolution should happen, then the recommendation could be, maybe try mediation or arbitration, like try some kind of alternate dispute resolution to see if there's some kind of middle ground that can be met, or like, something that's less expensive than going straight into litigation, because litigation is very daunting to a lot of people just because it is an expense. It's stressful, it's time constraints, it's, high finding attorneys and all this kind of stuff. So there are, those alternate dispute resolution type options. Obviously, if that doesn't work out, then litigation is that's always there. So that's kind of the recommendation sometimes.
And one other thought, I'm not a litigator, so I don't necessarily handle the disputes. I do handle settlement negotiations and settlement conversations. And my kind of piece of advice is yes, disputes arise, and some of them are not resolvable by settlement. But always keep in mind that just because you're currently in a dispute does not mean that the relationship ends in a dispute or everybody walks away. I've had a number of circumstances where a client will come to me and say, there's a product infringement in the marketplace. And instead of simply trying to shut the other company down, maybe there's a deal to be done. Maybe they're making really good, high quality product and they didn't realize that they needed a license, or, maybe they did realize it, but they did it anyways, but they're willing to, fall in line and play ball now. So a fight is not the only end to a dispute. There are other alternatives. So I know it can be hard when you're kind of in the midst of feeling like somebody, like you've been wronged, or, somebody's taking advantage, but keep in mind that there are multiple potential ways to resolve a dispute, not exclusively the like litigation route or the kind of, negative route.
I love that advice. It reminds me of an artist that we represent. This was years ago. We found someone was infringing on their trademark and creating a bunch of merch and selling it on Etsy and eBay and Amazon and doing all this crazy stuff. And so we sent, a cease and desist, and we're like, you don't have the right to be printing this client's name and selling merch and making money off of it. And the response was, I'm a really big fan of this artist and I'm only doing this because I want to help promote him. How can I be involved? That's really interesting. And like, this kid seems to like really mean well. So we ended up actually entering into an agreement with him, and where he was authorized to sell the merch, and it benefited both parties. And it was awesome because, he then got to meet the artist that he, looked up to. And I think that's an awesome solution.
I mean, that's a royalty stream for your client, or at the very least a license fee. It's additional resources for the person who is building and selling the product. There can be positive ways. I mean, when I think it was in high school, and I went to the MoMA on like a class field trip or something, and I remember seeing a painting that I was like, wow, that's beautiful. I would love to like put that on a shirt. And I didn't know what it meant to do that, or like what a license agreement was at the time. But like, there are people out there that are, they're not doing things in bad faith. Brianna, like you said, they're a fan and they just want it, right? Like, they thought that they could create the Instagram account because they're a fan, not because they were intending to, pass off as somebody else. So there might be other explanations for what's going on. Keep it in mind, and just keep the like positive outcome in mind as well.
Yeah, I love that thought, because I think when those things happen, we immediately go into like defense mode, right? And you're thinking, how do I protect myself? Not how do I turn this into an opportunity? So that's a great way to approach it.
The difference between a litigator's mind and a transaction. We're always trying to settle, like we're always trying to come up with some sort of solution.
Creative solutions.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so we only have a few minutes left. So I wanted to see, maybe do you have one piece of legal advice you would give to aspiring musicians or people just starting out in their careers in the industry? Do you have any thoughts about that? I know we've talked about a lot of advice.
I can go. It's not really legal advice. It's more so just kind of advice generally. But I would say, as an artist, to understand and really kind of take a step back and think about what your short and long-term goals are. So like, 5-year goal, 10-year goal, like really think about what you want that to be and be able to communicate that, well to people around you, whether it's your team, anybody else, because that's your number one resource, and that's who's going to be able to help you get there. And a lot of times, if you don't know what that is, like, but a lot of times we'll have artists will be like, okay, what do you want from this deal? Like, what are you trying to do in 5 years? And if you're like, oh, I don't know, it's really difficult for us as your team members or any managers, anybody, to really help you get to where you want to go. So I think that like having a focus or having like a direction, even if it changes along the way, is really helpful, to communicate to an attorney. Because if they know that going into it, they know what they're looking for in deals. They know what to ask for. And so it's just a really important thing to be able to say like, hey, this is what I want to do. I don't necessarily know how to get there, but maybe they have something up their sleeve that they can help you out with.
Totally. I think going back to what I think I've said multiple times about
Hire a lawyer.
no, not hire a lawyer. But I think that due to the existence of the saturation of artists that are out there, because the barrier to entry is so minimal. I mean, like, they were both saying you could go on social media and promote yourself, that talent isn't as important, not as important, but talent isn't everything these days. You could be just as talented as the person next to you, but if you don't treat yourself like a business, you're not going to necessarily get yourself to where you want to go. If where you want to go is, to the moon. So I would say my advice is treat, even though you're an artist and there is, artistry behind it. And that's so important to always remember, treat yourself like a business and pretend like, you're the CEO, and who do you need to bring on to help you run this thing properly?
Yeah. So I was perfect. I'm going to tie what you guys both just said together. So Alexis was talking about know where you want to go and what you're looking for out of this. And Brianna's talking about building the team around you. One way to think about it is to recognize, in addition to recognizing what you know and where you want to go, is what you don't know and where you need to educate yourself. And we talked about it before. There are ways that you can educate yourself. There are books, there are resources, there's podcasts. But the other way to do that is to bring in a team of people around you that can help you with that, right? Like, I'm a lawyer. I'm not a creative person. I'm not necessarily going to do the best job building my firm's logo or marketing the firm, because that's not necessarily where my skill set is. I look for talented people to have around me to help build me up. Artists should be doing the same thing. Find the right people, the right team to have around you, and help them fill in the gaps, what you can't either educate yourself or what you don't already know.
Totally.
That's funny. That reminds me, like I've lectured many times at with university classes to musicians or music business classes, and I told them, I remember one of my piece of advice is get to know the law students in your school. You'll need them one day.
That's great advice. No, that's great advice. We have the same thing. We have so many like friends that are in different areas of the law that we talk to. So yeah, absolutely.
Or whatever else you need, because maybe they'll need a musician to play at some event, but you'll need some legal advice. So it's a great time in your life to kind of build that tribe around you.
Totally.
And you can still do that today too, because now I know you guys.
Exactly.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been such a great pleasure to speak to you guys. I know we sort of only touched the surface of this, but I feel like I learned a lot today too. So really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Laura.
I think Bonnie listed some of the books that we discussed in the comments of the stream. So if you guys are looking for some great resources, please take a look in the comments. I just want to add, we have another event coming up in September with the Women's International Music Network. We are hosting a live event in Los Angeles on September 17th. It's a pro songwriter showcase and panel where we'll be chatting with professional songwriters, and they're also going to play. And it features Asia as our host, moderator, and panelist, Christina Perry, Milk, and Judith Hill. So a panel of incredible performers and songwriters, and I'm going to be there in person too. So I'd be really stoked to see you there on September 17th. You can find out more about it on our website, thewomen.com, which is THEWIMN.com. All right, guys. Thanks so much. Have a good evening, day, whatever time you're watching this, everybody. And